Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Young Screenwriters Podcast. I'm Alexie, and I'm here today with Adam and Theo, and we are talking about the pilot of Three Body Problem, which is a adaptation that is on Netflix made by Game of Thrones dudes, um,
And
and
Alexander Wu.
and Alexander Wu, and for a long time, this thing was considered unadaptable. And so that we're going to talk a lot about kind of like the adaptation today and how they pulled it off. How to adapt the unadaptable and sci-fi and all good characters, strong inciting incidents. There's a lot to get into, but I'd like to start with just first impressions. So
Yeah. Theo, you go.
I was really excited to watch this. I don't remember whether or not I read any of these books. I had to get rid of a lot of books, so there's some blank spots in my history, but I don't think that I did read them. But I was excited about the show as soon as I saw it because I remember when the books came out and I remember them being a big deal. And what I think that I was most enamored with was how many great like women characters there were leading the fray in the show. Like almost
mm,
all of the protagonists are women. And it wasn't something I noticed like while I was watching it, but afterward I was like, oh yeah, that was great. And I really enjoyed all of the characterizations. Everyone is a little too good looking, which is my only complaint about the
they're
show.
too hot.
They
They're
are
too
hot.
hot.
They are beautiful. But in terms of like the concepts, the inciting incident, just like that image, first of all of the early timeline China storyline was like ridiculously compelling. And then we flip to this thing where we have, you know, a physicist seeing a countdown in her eyeballs. Like I just loved it. I just thought, how many great ideas all in one.
Absolutely. What do you think, Adam?
I mean, I'm gonna be a repeat the last same as in the Dune lecture. I lecture same as in the Doom podcast. I read the books and quite liked them and have a lot of opinions. But I think this was better than the book in some ways in terms of pacing, characters, humor, just like being fun to read, it's fun to enjoy and consume. Like I really am looking forward to season 2 if they greenlight it. Unfortunately, this is the most expensive Netflix show of all time, and it might not be popular enough to get a season 2 because it's doing well, but like not like $180 million well to justify.
We're going to change that.
Yeah, everyone watch it right now, over and
this
over.
is going to change that because I really want a season 2. I loved it. I've seen the whole season. I think the pilot in particular was really did a great job of getting to the red meat of the idea really fast. Because the book is, it takes a while to get there. And, in an hour here, we get to the idea that, this woman who's part of like the Cultural Revolution has this huge tragedy that motivates her to make certain choices. Won't spoil. But and then, scientists are dying around the world. That's such a great dramatic question. For me, like I'm like, oh wait, I want to know more about that. And I think so much about great inciting incidents is like the ability for the incident itself to create questions that we want to know the answers to, whether it's will Bob buy the house or what's going on with what's going on here. Right. Those are all different questions that can be, an event happens to characters and it should open up the world. And I think they did a great job with that here. Like,
Yeah, absolutely. I just watched the pilot like last night and I was like, "Oh my god, I need to watch all of it right now at 3 a.m." And didn't cuz I attempted to rein myself in, but the moment I watched it I was like, why did I not know about this before? But like, the three body problem as like a concept was definitely something that I fell down the rabbit hole about. Um on Wikipedia, just like in the past, I would always love reading about like space and black holes and all this craziness. And I don't know, is it worth quickly defining it? I know Jim said it as a joke, but real quickly, what the three body problem is loosely is that when you have two, okay, tell me if I'm wrong. I have an arts degree. Um, Basically, when in space, you have two bodies like big, like gravitational fields. We're really, really good at predicting that orbit, right? Like
Mhm.
it's relatively easy to predict that orbit. But when you have three bodies in the same gravitational field doing like orbiting together, we don't yet understand how to predict that orbit. It does something unexpected that we can't yet explain. So that I believe is what the three body problem loosely is it's kind of like, okay, well, why can't we do the math for this situation? What don't we know? Um, so
Perfect answer.
There's a
Perfect
problem
answer.
with three bodies.
yeah,
And by episode 4, you will know exactly how that manifests in the show.
they solved
Wish I
it.
could talk about it.
Yeah, they solved it, but, it's yeah, it's really
They don't.
interesting, and it also, like, if you know that concept, then just watching the pilot, you like, I knew that, but I didn't know where else this was going, and I was like, "Dang, okay, I think I know who they're communicating with then. It's either God or aliens, because they kept talking about God, and then they kept talking about it, and then I was like, "But or it could be aliens, so don't tell me. Don't tell me which one it is, but talking to somebody out there."
It's not God.
Wow!
No,
Wow!
but that's an episode 2 spoiler. That's an episode 2
Yeah,
spoiler.
yeah.
That's not like a big mystery. Like I'm
That's right,
just
Jim. Or
or
alien
alien gods.
gods.
No, honestly,
I think it's
technology
pretty
is advanced
clear in the
enough.
pilot
It's clear.
what we're dealing with, right? Like,
It was like it was clear that it's something out there, but the fact that people kept, like, randomly talking about God and, like, our Lord, I was like, "Are they claiming that they're talking to g" I didn't think it was, like, actually gonna be a spiritual movie, but, like, do they think it's God? Like, what's going on here?
there's some
Um,
culty bits, right? We love culty bits.
I love me some culty bits. Um,
Yeah.
so something that, Adam, that you brought up that I think would be fun to talk about is the inciting incidents, and, the way that this pilot is structured is that we're really playing with 3 plot lines. We have the timeline in the 60s in communist China with Wenji and, her grappling with this as a scientist in a world that doesn't want her doing this type of research because the leader does not like it. We also have the what town are they in? The Boston 5?
Oxford.
Oxford
They're in
5?
yeah.
Yeah, the Oxford 5, who are, like, different scientists who all do something related to physics and are grappling with the fact that all of the colliders across the world are malfunctioning or giving some sort of readout that completely contradicts everything that they've ever known before about science and getting shut down, and all of these scientists are killing themselves. And then there is also the investigation track, where we have an investigator who is trying to figure out what the heck is going on with all these scientists and what's wrong here. So that's kind of the setup. But then inciting incidents. Adam, you said it was really strong. Do you want to
Well,
share
I
a little
mean,
more about that?
if you want to, get technical, I think each of those plot lines has structurally an inciting incident, and they come very early in the plot line to get us interested, right? And they all kind of come together into a greater, question at the end of the episode. But it's her father dying, and
Mhm.
like that first, like that's a huge life-changing event that changes everything in her life. We don't really get a sense of what was before that, and it doesn't really matter because it's just sort of all consequence. Her whole plot line is consequence of like how she reacts to that and what happens, right? And you could sort of fiddle about like because there are a few like events that happen that are life-changing. I mean, for Augie, it's the countdown starting, right? It's like
Mhm.
this thing starts happening to her. What do I do about it? And sort of the rest of the episode is her trying to deal with that. I'm just talking about episode inciting incidents, right? And then Vera's death,
Yeah.
suicide,
Mhm.
especially for what's his name in the show, Saul.
Saul, yeah.
Sorry, the original character is Luo Ji, and they
Oh,
changed because
interesting.
it all took place in China, and they were mostly Chinese names, not all of them, but like some of them. So, and they also combined some characters, but Vera's death for him, although he's not really, I would say, a protagonist in this episode. He becomes more important later on, and I think especially in season 2, like which is kind of a we'll get into the novels and the difference in a non-spoiler way in a minute, but I think that those events, the countdown, the father's death and Vera's suicide, all three of those events, and Vera's suicide specifically is tied to the investigation plot line, right? The countdown is tied to Augie's plot line and whether or not she is going to shut down her lab, or sorry, was that an episode 2 thing? Sorry.
No, I think it's implied that all the labs are kind of shut down. Yeah.
And the first one, so all three of those sort of plot lines, I think, early on in the episode, all of those events spur and create the energy for everything else. So for Augie, for the Oxford Five as a whole, and the investigators, and
Wenji.
The Wenji's plotline in the 60s, they're all influenced by those events, and it's like causality. What happens because of that? Because of that? Because of that? Because of that? And I think if you could say in television, every episode has a episode inciting incident for every plot line, just from a very technical way. How well you do that is, I think, a big question. Like, what's great about this show is that all of those things are life-changing events. Usually life-changing inciting incidents in a drama happen at the end of the episode, but these life-changing events happen for everybody at the beginning. I think there's a worth show that starts the countdown at the end of the episode, right? We spend time getting to know them or whatever. And this show does, the book's very dense. They have a lot of material to get through, but I really like dramatically that we cover so much ground in this episode. What do you think?
You've got to catch everyone, right? I think you've got to catch everyone's attention super early to get everyone invested in a show like this. And for me, it was immediate. Okay, one, I see this woman watch her father be essentially murdered live, and then the countdown for me was the ultimate. That was wow, okay, this is a phenomenal concept that I need to see what's going on. And then we have this suicide. And what I love about all of them is that they all interact in terms of the story, right? There's a triangle between all three of them, and I think that's really important. And then I also really like, I can't remember his name. He's kind of the comic relief character, and he's also in Game of Thrones.
Jack,
yeah. I thought Jack's character was really interesting. And I think
I don't remember Empire.
Snacks Empire. I don't remember if more of what he does is in the second episode or in the first with the video game, but the video game itself is also incredibly fascinating. I really enjoyed that idea. I've been playing with something like that in my own work, so that was really interesting for me, to watch how they did it, to see, okay, what does this thing look like? Because this is technology that's going to be in our very near future. In the show, they say 50 to 100 years. I think that we're looking at probably 25, 30 years before we have this technology, but it's coming. What will it look like? And that's an interesting question to ask visually. How does a device like that work?
That kind of ties into how do you present a source material that is so deeply sci-fi, so such hard science fiction, to an audience that is probably, they're just on Netflix. They're probably coming because they like Game of Thrones, not necessarily coming from a sci-fi obsessed background, right? And I think part of how they accomplished that is by not doing any buildup. She starts seeing the countdown immediately.
Yeah.
We jump into a murder in both of the other two plot lines, with the investigators and with Wenji and communist China. We start with murders before we really get into too terribly much science. We're really hitting it hard with the character driven stuff, which maybe is a good time to talk a little bit about how they pulled off the adaptation, which Adam's the one that's really read the book out of us. So,
so this is not a spoiler, but it's the books are very different, right? They take place in China mostly, and they have, the Oxford Five doesn't really exist. They took different protagonists from the three books and sort of chose to sort of combine them, because the different books take place at different time periods, right? Like,
So it's not the Beijing Five.
it's not the Beijing Five. Some of the characters do have, like, they'll take like a pairing of characters and like sort of, they took like a few pairings and put them all together and combined some characters.
That's interesting.
Yeah, so like they took like a character who's huge in book 3 and combined them with a character who's really big in book 1 for Jin's character, right? And I think that's just smart, and because like you got to make us invested with these people from the beginning. Want to make us feel like we're going on a journey with them, and I think so to take 3 books that all of them span different periods of time, and they're it's not like a linear continuation, to go everything that's happened in this time period will happen in this television show, right? So to help us track with the characters and grow with them. And I thought it was very smart and really well done. That being said, that's a little bit of a spoiler in the sense of the books cover a lot of time outside of just this era. But although we do go to the start to have a plotline in the 60s and present day. So
something that I read was that the Game of Thrones dudes, who I'm blanking on their name, I'm sure you both know.
D&D.
D&D.
Good old D&D. That basically they had completely finished filming. They had put everything together. They were doing a final watch of the whole project to make sure that it was good. And they were like, people who read the book will totally get this. People who don't read the book are going to be a little bit lost. And so they went back and they added that scene at the bar where the 2 women are talking about, like, they're all hanging out there and they're like talking about what they do. And like the guy comes up and hits on them. Yeah, hits on them.
I love that scene.
Yeah.
With the piano, starts singing Piano Man in such a horrible way. I love that. I love that.
Yeah. And so apparently that was something that they kind of added at the last minute and that Netflix let them run with. And it was interesting because, on the surface, it doesn't feel like that scene is doing a ton of work, but it really reminds you that every single scene needs to do something for the plot. And it was having that guy hit on them and say, "What do you do?" And they get to kind of just like rattle this off to intimidate him away. It was a really fun way for us to understand that, like, their place in all these different stories. So like that they're physicists too, that they understand that these deaths are happening in the scientific community, and just kind of like seeing them in each other's orbit. Pun intended. But yeah, I mean,
So here's my question, I guess, for Adam. Would you say that this show it takes the essence of the books and transmutes them into a show version of the story?
I'd say 80%. I also got the feeling that they were rushing through book 1 to get to book 2 because book 2 is better. Like
interesting.
A lot of the plot. Sorry, this is not spoiler. This is more structural. Like we get most of the plot of book 1 by episode 4.
Oh, interesting.
Most of it, not all of it, but like some of like the big act 3 like resolution happens as the midpoint of the series, and then they're like do a bunch of setup from book 3 and book 2 at the end, the second half, which was interesting. And I think you couldn't do a straight adaptation without like setting up who all these people are and why they matter to stuff like the bar scene. I think it's important, especially because Jin's character is 2 different characters put into one, right? And she's arguably very important. So, but Alexie needs to watch the rest of the series.
I do need to watch. I'm going to. That's going to be my weekend task.
So good. It's funny. I was surprised by how many jokes there were. Honestly, like I was really surprised because the original 3-body problem is not funny. It's not funny at all.
No, the physics diatribes weren't funny.
I mean,
But so for a long time, the books were kind of called unadaptable. And if I'm not mistaken, there was a lot of like false starts on people wanting to adapt it and then it not working. Why do you think that this time actually worked? Was it because they were willing to so completely mess with the timelines, or like what do you think it was?
Yes, although it has been adapted in Chinese. They did the first book. There was a series that's pretty well respected, and liked, with some problems. But I think overall the reason is what I was saying. Like you've got book 3 spans a significant period of time, book one feels like you can wrap your heads around book one. Book
Mhm.
two and book three are like go places and get weird. And hard science fiction, like, we saw with Dune, when you get weird and when you jump through time, when you have really complicated things happen, it's hard to take a Netflix audience along the ride with that. And I think their solution that they're hoping works is go all in on character for all of the books right now, make you know who these people are, spend time with them, and then get weird. I mean, they did say they want to get to the end of book three. So for book readers, they'll know what that means. It's just crazy. I just can't imagine. I can't imagine that working. Book three is unadaptable. I'll just say that.
So they'll have to prove you wrong.
I'm not a fan of book three.
Interesting.
Book two is one of the best science fiction books I've ever read in my life. I loved it. So I can't wait for season 2. This means nothing to people who haven't read it. So sorry.
I think part of it, like adapting, especially hard science fiction, is making things palatable to a viewing audience, right? Like you have these concepts that when you're reading are kind of a lot easier to figure out and portray and make a reader understand them. But then how do you take something like that and make it visual? And I think that's the hard part. And I think they did a really good job of that, partially by bringing these characters in and really distilling these ideas into what I would assume are simpler concepts than how they're presented in the books.
Yeah.
Mhm. Yeah, I agree.
And I just think, oh yeah, you go, Theo, Alexie.
Oh, no, I mean, I was just saying, like, I really liked how they handled just, like, the way that these things look. Like, it was really cool to kind of, like, see through, Augie's eyes, at first, how it was kinda, like, fuzzy and, there's, like, a bunch of lights kinda moving around, which looked a lot like what the guy was seeing on his little collider screen, and then it eventually, kind of manifested into a countdown. And that was something that really connected all of our plot lines at once was she saw the countdown, she saw it in the sky. We saw it in blood written on the wall in the moment with the investigator at first. And presumably that is something either being sent by or sent to our thing in our past timeline with the huge satellite. Something about it's connected there. I don't think that they've actually seen the countdown in the past in the past yet in terms of the pilot. But
you got to watch episode 2, Alexie.
I know.
It's so good. It's so good.
It's very good.
I really want to. So Theo, you and I both really, in particular, love writing sci-fi. I don't know. Do you have any like things that you picked up from this that you're gonna kinda use in your own work or, like, any, stuff that you liked about the way that they handled this sci-fi stuff? I don't know.
Yeah, I think I do. Like, I think especially the helmet, the video game helmet was really interesting for me because I have something similar that I'm playing with. Um, and what I really liked, I just think that the visual aspect is so intriguing, but then also this like interconnected way. And then we haven't gotten into the midpoint, but when we bring in Tatiana at the midpoint, who is the woman who is appearing, not appearing to speak to Augie and light her cigarette and all of that. She really introduces this other aspect of it that I found really intriguing of, okay, now we have a little culty stuff happening in the background. Which I think really adds a layer of intrigue, right? And I think that's a really important thing is that it's when you have these science fiction concepts, you cannot have people explaining them who all agree. Like there has to be some kind of like disconnect in either whether or not they agree on these concepts or if somebody maybe interprets that a different way as in, oh, this
Mm.
is a cosmic deity, this is a god versus this is science because in a novel, right, you can explain all of this stuff and that's fine, the reader will follow it. But if you had a conversation of two people where they both agreed, it would just feel like exposition info dump. So I really think having these like conflictual but also interconnecting concepts really did a great job of presenting these ideas and making them palatable.
Yeah, totally. I know for me, it was kind of like there was the scene at the end when the universe is blinking or winking or whatever at them, and Augie is there with Saul, and she has like the little cereal box decoder, and she just kind of gives it to Saul, and he's like, "Oh yeah, I know more. This is kind of like Morse code." And then we just kind of skip over. He doesn't have to figure out how to do it. We just accept that he knows how to use the cereal box decoder ring and is able to kind of translate what's happening into numbers. It kind of just reminded me that sometimes I try too hard to connect
Yeah.
the dots for people in my own writing. I'm like, no, that's such a leap. I can't possibly just like say they figure it out. But
Well, the
you really
line he
can.
says is, she's like, "You know Morse code? I know a lot of shit.
Yeah,
I know tons of
exactly.
shit. Like
Simple.
I'm
Yeah.
smart. Whatever. Shut up."
Yeah, I know everything. Shut up, yeah.
But
And
also I did believe it. I did believe it
yeah,
because he's a physicist, a particle accelerator, who's single with no children.
that
These
he
are
would know about
obsessive
this thing.
people. These are people we can very much believe these people are very like honed in on their obsessions. And I think that that makes it all feel real.
Yeah, like, it feels like that setting that up early, I imagine, is going to come into play more throughout, that these are people who can make connections fast and, like, not have to spend forever kind of explaining the minutia of how this serial decoder thing works,
Which is
you
nice
know?
because I didn't wanna know how it worked, I've
No.
had experiences like that. There is a book, called S, and it's by J.J. Abrams. He didn't write the whole thing, he had another author with him, and it's the coolest book, and it has all of these little pieces inside of it. Okay, so like every couple pages has like a napkin that's real, right? Because the concept of the book is that it's a novel and that it's two people who are writing like they're writing each other things in the margins back and forth, discussing what happened to the author of said novel. So there's like a napkin that they might have used. And it's like you found this book that these people have used. And it's so interesting. And they have things like that where there is a decoder that you can use, and if you want to figure it out, you can figure out that puzzle on your own. But sometimes when you're watching a show, I don't want to sit there and figure out the puzzle. I want them to do it for me. I want to get to the story.
Yeah, no, exactly. I would absolutely look at that for a few seconds and then Google what it was, you know?
Yeah.
Like, I'd rather just be told what the puzzle was, but
Although, this brings up the kind of the question of, what are the different pieces of information, the puzzles and questions that we solve for the reader, and then what are the questions that we want them to put together? Because there's a
Mhm.
joy in putting
right.
two and two together, right? And I think that's always about the story, right? It's about the characters and their situation. It's never, okay, here's a Morse code. How does Morse code work?
What's the
People
better
don't want to
visual
do,
image,
Yeah.
right? It's
yeah.
like when you have an image, and I think that the last scene is a really great example of that because they don't have to explain anything. They just show us this image. If you have a great image that can give the audience something like that, oh my god, it's amazing. You don't need to explain it. So anytime there's an opportunity for that, it's beautiful.
And there's another example that I just now remembered of this. It's when G is finally brought into the fold of like the Red Coast project, and they sit her down and they're like, "It's against our judgment. The guy wants to bring you in, and like we're going to tell you the true nature." And then she says, "It's not a weapons project, and I know that because of like you modulating the waves or whatever." And they're like, "Yes, it is not." And she's like, "It's communication," or they say it's communication. But either way, it's like she was smart enough to make that connection. And because of that, it became a dialogue back and forth rather than like an exposition dump in the moment. And I think that that's another one of my takeaways for sci-fi stuff is not being afraid to have characters who are smart and figuring it out as you go. A lot of times in sci-fi and like, fantasy and worlds that aren't our world, you start with a character who is also new to the world, so you get to kind of learn alongside them. And I think that there's something appealing about the person that you're learning alongside being very smart and being able to make these connections ahead of the world necessarily revealing them. I just think it's a fun dynamic that I hadn't really thought about before. Um,
Yeah,
Competency is fun to
exactly.
watch.
yeah, it's fun to watch people be good at things.
Yeah. It's not
I
fun to
like,
watch somebody have difficulty like assembling IKEA furniture, you know?
Yeah, or struggling to figure
no,
out the Morse code.
but I'm
Yeah.
trying to think of an example where, because I do think it's important to let the audience make connections on things. But I think there's a fine line, right? Like where it can be frustrating if it's not set up the right way. Like there's a really fine balance of leaving like Easter eggs or like leaving all of the pieces for the audience to put together. And I think I'm going to start keeping more like examples of those as I see them.
Mhm. I'm trying to think like what we had to connect the dots on here. I mean, they didn't explicitly say that every single scientist who killed themselves was seeing the countdown, but
Right.
like, you know, we had to make the understanding that at least a few of them were probably seeing this countdown because the first one was, and now this other girl is. And so we had to make the connection that like she was in danger. But I
Do they
mean,
ever
and
say that
again,
Vera saw the countdown? Is that something they say explicitly?
no, Vera hasn't, as far as I know in the pilot, Vera has not seen the countdown. It's just Augie. Sorry, I might have said her name wrong. I might have said the wrong person. But just like, that we don't necessarily get completely handed the connections between the countdown and people dying and all of that.
Which is
Uh,
satisfying, it's satisfying in a way to be like, "Oh, yes, I've connected that." But it's gotta be clear.
yeah. Yeah. Like it's got to like almost walk you there and then kind of trust that you can make the final step across the threshold. But yeah, I really enjoyed that. I am curious, like, so for me who knows nothing, I will say I looked up enough to understand that it matters, but the video game felt so freaking random. Like, it was like we were doing all this other stuff, and then suddenly she's wearing this gold helmet that takes her to a desert with like a temple and like dead people and a sun. And like, in the moment, it felt very like, wait, what? Like, now we're gonna go down this path of a video game? Like, I don't know. What did I think you all might have come into it knowing more, or Theo, did you know what that was gonna be
Not
and how
100%. I have a really bad habit of spoiling myself really early on things because 'cause I'm impatient. So I will read ahead on things before I get there so I know what's going on. So, like, but I had an idea. Like, when I saw that, I was like, "Okay, like, this is gonna play in to what we're dealing with in the future." And I think in the second episode, it becomes even more clear. And there are like some really foundationally cool things that happen in that video game in the second episode that I had never seen before that like thrilled me where I was like, "Oh my god." Like still like I think about it and I'm like that is the coolest thing I've ever seen. And Adam and I had a conversation about it where it kind of becomes clear, like, you can kind of make that connection with just, like, a little bit of forethought of, like, what that means. So I
Mhm,
think they do a good enough job, in my experience, of giving it to you, then filling it out enough so that it's there, and that by the time I'm assuming by the time everything is actually presented, you're like, "Okay, yeah, I get it."
that makes sense. In the pilot, it's definitely just kinda like a, "What the F is this?" And we're just gonna leave you on this kinda like, this thought of like, "Oh, and she was playing a game that's very, very freakishly futuristic and immersive," and what does that mean? Um, but I'm curious to see how that shakes out because it seems like it has to really matter, I would imagine.
It does.
So
Somewhat. I mean, like my experience was we're already there. Like they were
Mm,
really rushing to show us that stuff. I mean, the Cultural Revolution stuff, that was like wow, we just burned through 200 pages. Not that much, but like they're just going so fast.
Yeah.
So I was surprised by that.
They did
That's
get through, like, her, like, romance with the guy who kind of lets her get arrested pretty quickly. Like, I thought there was gonna be a little more about that, and I don't know if he comes back later. But that was pretty quick and like, "Oh, okay, now we're on the military base," or whatever.
yeah, it was all very, like, that dude sold her out so fast, and I was unclear, like, exactly I don't know. I appreciated the pace that it goes, and it kinda just reminds me for my own pilot how fast stuff needs to happen, right? Like, you have to have these major plot moments back to back to back to back. Like in the communist China thing, there was never really a downbeat. She was like constantly there was constant like reversals and reveals and twists that kind of um you know wove us brought us along.
There was no languishing, right? Like, every moment was
No.
like, "Okay, let's go, let's go."
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
Yeah,
Um
I love it. The one thing I'll just say is sees for in a non-spoiler way, what I think this show did extraordinarily well, and it's the book too, but the show did really well is, and I think the lesson you can take away, I think, is to have a lot of interesting things happen. You know,
Yeah.
like don't give the audience a lot, like,
yeah.
and try to right, like, because I feel like about a quarter of the events that happen in this season are usually what are the events that a full season of television can base itself off of conceptually. Like you could base a show just off of the video game
Yeah.
and the things that happen to the game, right? Like, and this show makes it like 1/4 of what's happening. There's so much happening, and that I mean, I think modern audiences kind of need that, whether it's on not just plot information or like stuff like that, but it could be just emotional information, right? Like think development with characters. Like I want to have a lot of things happen. Um,
We're so
Absolutely.
media literate, right? Like, we are so even people who are not writers are very attuned to things like structure, even though they might not understand the terminology to do that. And I think that that just requires us as writers to do so much of a better job to make sure that we are meeting their expectations at every step of the way, because they'll notice. Like, if something's off, they'll notice even if they don't know why.
And June has a interesting like a question that's very directly related to this is do you think the fast pace of things are symptoms of modern times or has it always been the case? I would definitely say that I think pace has gotten faster in modern shows, but I don't know if it's so much like I see a lot of people arguing that it's kind of like the attention deficit of people today. We don't want to sit around for long, but I think it's also just the fact that we are so saturated in stories all the time that if you go at a slow pace, we're going to anticipate where you're going before you do it. Like you have to do more faster now to get to a place where we're actually seeing things that are new and surprising. Um
There's
More
just so
so than
much.
yeah. Yeah, like more so than like just being like, "Oh no, people can't pay attention that long." I think it's also just in every field you have to push the bar, further and further. Like you have to keep doing it better, and I think one way of that is just that we're packing in better like, more information and getting more efficient in our storytelling so that we can take it places that we've actually not seen before.
I think that's
That
a really important point,
Thank
that
you.
we're innovating, right? And it's not just, oh, I have to write something that stands among my contemporaries. No, we have to write things that stand above our contemporaries. We can stand on the shoulders of these giants, but we have to do the work to make something new and exciting, because that's really what audiences are looking for. Like, every time a new show comes out, what are you interested in? It's something that's new.
Yeah, exactly, and I think we've seen so many stories by the time we're, like, in our 20s and our 30s, whatever it is. We've seen so many stories that you really have to get through the stuff that we expect fast to take us to places that we haven't seen before and that are actually interesting and like pushing boundaries. And I think that could be part of why, besides just like less attention, that stuff is so packed now, right?
Yeah, I think that's part of it too. Like
Mhm.
at least with me, I notice that if something is a slow burn, I am less likely to finish it.
Yeah. Yeah. I like sometimes I'm like, wow, I really like this, but then it's one of those things like where I'm like, but it's not my like relaxed show. It's like a thinky show. And I don't want to think right now. Like I don't want to have to like, really focus in right now on this and like enjoy these like little moments. I want to see stuff happen. So maybe it is partially attention. I don't know. You know, someone else can tell me that. But
Tension, energy, you know.
yeah. It
I,
also
I always feel like with these types of shows, like sometimes people, like at least for myself, like if I'm not in the mood, I usually am
yeah.
always in the mood when it happens, right?
Yeah.
But like of my own volition, will I go see the cerebral science fiction show? You know, but when it's there, I'm like, oh wait, I'll watch 10 episodes of this.
Yeah.
You know,
Right. Yeah, I'll binge it, but then it's like, oh, do I want to do this? It's like for me, it's like taking a shower. It's like once I'm in the shower, I'm like, this is great. But to get in the shower, I'm like, oh, I have to really talk myself into it.
It's like, "Oh, wow, I should always work out. I should always do this. I feel so good." And then it's like, "Well
Exactly.
well, do you wanna do it?" Yeah, and, it also kinda connects back to stuff that we talked about in writing the pilot, which we're actually doing a launch again soon, April 5th. So we'll talk about that a little bit more later. But, in writing the pilot, we talk about how when you're writing the pilot episode for your series, not to leave anything on the table, like, to really, really just freaking go for it and put your best stuff in season 1, and especially in your pilot. Jump into what's fun about your pilot, get there by the midpoint. We talk a lot about the midpoint being the inciting incident of the show, which I believe in this one would essentially be Tatiana or
I think
mystery
so.
chick, mystery lady telling Augie, close down your lab or your countdown will get to 0 and nothing good happens when we get to 0. So that's really the moment that I think the show kind of turns on, and you really need that to happen that fast in your pilot and not leave behind any of the good stuff. Like we got so much here that seems like it was actually in the books much later. Like Adam, you mentioned that the game headset was actually a lot later and they pulled it up because you just don't want to leave anything behind. You want to include all the good stuff, and then if you're worried about not having enough later, it just means you have to come up with more good stuff. Like that's kind of the challenge of writing is to keep coming up with good stuff on and on.
And do we think so? Just thinking about that midpoint, a lot of what we've done, especially with writing the pilot, is this idea that the midpoint of your pilot is the inciting incident of your series. And I think that that's a really important piece of writing modern shows. And
Mhm.
pilots that I've read who don't have this, I've always written a note of like, I have no idea where the show is going. And I think just because we've been conditioned almost to expect that. For me, that scene was the indication that something else is happening here. There's a
Mhm.
bigger plan, there's more stuff out here, and it's very mysterious, but somebody knows. Like, somebody knows what this means, and somebody's in charge. Um, so I'm curious to hear what y'all think about that.
Yeah, I mean, I think a lesser version, like a worse version of this script or an early draft of this script would definitely have put that at the end of the episode, right? Like would
Right.
definitely have put, oh, this is the hook. This is the hook to get you to the next episode. This is kind of like, you're locking in, but we really need that as that's really the inciting incident of the show. And you really need it at the midpoint so we can already start seeing what is this going to look like when we get rolling? Like, what is this going to look like when we're deep into the middle of the season, which is kind of like the act two of your season? And yeah, I think that's something that was advice that you gave to me, Adam, about features was moving the ultimate test to the midpoint. So moving the thing that would normally break us into act 3 all the way to the middle, and then challenging yourself to push it even further than you would have. And I think that that's the same thing that we see now in pilots. Is there's a version of this that would have been a lot slower, where we end with that kind of threat, and then you're like, oh no, what's going to happen after the threat? But in this one, the writers put it in the middle and challenged themselves to keep going, which really got us deep into what this is going to be, like them having to decode the universe winking at them and realizing the connection to the countdown and all of that.
I can't wait for you to watch the rest of it.
Yeah,
that moment gave me chills. That moment gave me chills when I watched it. I was like, oh, I gotta watch this.
Right? Yeah. Like, what? That's what I love. If you can surprise me, I'm like, oh, okay, I'm listening.
Yeah, exactly. I was like, I don't know. It was one of those things where I know that I might have been nervous about like writing that in a script. Like, what is this going to look like? And it just looked so amazing that it just reminds you can really, if you kind of set everything up right, like if you build enough tension to these moments, you can make things like the sky blinking really cool and really matter and really interesting. And I agree, Jim, the universe is flirty, winking at us.
It sounds like a nightmare, like one of my nightmares.
Well, cool. Is there anything else that we wanted to kind of circle back to about this?
I'm
Any
just
other
excited
last thought?
watching.
Yeah. I'm sure I'm gonna freak out later and see how many of my guesses were right, even though it is apparently not God that they're talking to.
Sorry. That episode 2 is pretty clear.
Yeah, it's fine.
Yeah.
Yeah. But no, I am excited. So cool. Thank you so much for joining us today, everybody. It was really fun talking about the 3-body problem. And I wanted to mention that starting April 5th, we are doing a launch where we are going to be discounting our courses, our premium courses, for about 10 days. So April 5th to April 15th, we're going to do a discount on writing the pilot and writing the feature. And so you can grab those even cheaper than usual. And we're going to have more information about that in the coming weeks. So if you want to stay in the loop, you can join our Discord, which is linked in the description, and get more notifications. If you're on our email list, you'll definitely hear about it. But we hope to see you there and in our free workshops. We do one Thursdays at 5:30 now, and Theo does a write-in on Sundays at 10 a.m. at the crack of dawn. And
Alexie's dawn.
Yeah, my dawn at the crack of freaking dawn. So yeah, there's a lot of fun stuff that we're doing that you can come by and hang out, and it's totally free. So we hope to see you there. All right. Thank you so much, everybody.
Thanks, everyone.
All right, we are now in the FAQ section, or the Q&A, not FAQ. I guess that's not quite right, but fun. Let's see. If you watch Yellow Jackets, I'd love to see an analysis.
We should do Yellow Jackets. Yellow Jackets is great.
So I watched the first episode, and I don't know, I wasn't hooked, but I'll give. I also heard that season 1 didn't go the direction I was hoping for it to go from a friend. So like that kind of tainted my interest in continuing.
Season 2 is where the stuff happens that you want to see, because I had that experience too, where at the end of season 1 I was like, oh, I didn't see, like, initially I felt like, oh, the promise wasn't delivered upon, but then it was delivered upon with aplomb in season 2. So I was okay with it, but I really aplomb.
Wow. Wow. Okay. I just pulled it up and I was like, what is this about? and on the Wikipedia page, I just see a link to cannibalism. So
Oh,
that
you're gonna love it. You're gonna I'm so surprised you haven't
No,
seen
it's
Yellow
Alexie.
Jacket.
It is right up your alley. It's
It's
the type
Alexi
of
coded.
it's
Alexi
Alexie code.
coded.
Yeah,
A
you'd
lot
like
of
it a
a
lot.
lot of women in distress. A lot of
And I just
Yes.
what
have
is
to
it? White
say,
women
Yep.
in distress.
Yep.
my
A lot of white women
girl
in distress.
Sophie Thatcher, who is in Yellow Jackets, she's the edgy girl. If Queen of Indie Sleaze was a movie tomorrow, she would be my lead. I would be like just over the
Okay.
moon. She's my
Okay.
girl.
Okay. I'm looking up all these people.
Putting it out there, Sophie. If you listen to this, if you're watching this, call
V
me.
and Theo's movie. Okay, this looks kind of fun. I will check it out. What's it on?
Amazon.
Amazon.
Freaking Amazon. Sounds good. I will check that out. And yes, this is a new format. We are trying to be more streamery. So we have like a little chat at the beginning, a little chat at the end. We're just a bunch of little streamers. And we answer some questions afterwards if we can't get to them in the podcast. But Andale says, what are you guys currently reading? I need a break from all the sci-fi I'm currently consuming. Screenwriting books would be good as well.
So I am reading right now My Year of Rest and Relaxation. Let me just look up the author.
Wait, is this like a self-help, or is this like
no?
Okay.
It's Otessa Moshfegh is her name.
Hilarious.
It's
and really
really
fucked up.
funny. It's like a satirical. It's like this like wasp woman in New York who's just like takes all these pharmaceuticals to just not kind of exist for a while, and she's a total train wreck. I'm enjoying it so far. It's got like a literary vibe that I've been craving a little bit more. So it's really good.
Interesting.
I'm making my way through Philip K. Dick collected stories.
Nice.
I had read Do Androids Dream of Electric Sheep
It's my favorite.
12 years ago, but I was like, I want to read some more of his short fiction because the only thing I have the stomach to really read are short stories right now because I cannot get through the novel for whatever reason.
Did I ever tell you guys that one of my nicknames in life used to be Philip K. Dick Girl?
Really? Okay. I
Yeah.
did not know this about you.
Yeah.
Did they know this about because you read it, or was it just
No, it was
like
because
the
of my
middle
writing.
school like
No, it was an agent.
No.
It was an agent who called me Philip K. Dick Girl.
Great. I love that.
I'll never shorten it. I the last book that I read just like for fun was the Wild Fourth Wing series, which is a smutty fantasy adventure. Girl goes to dragon riding school.
Shadow Boy,
childhood best friend dude, love triangle. Be mindful listening to the audible in public.
Oh my, no.
It will take a turn. I was not expecting that. Theo was just like, it's so fun. It's so fantasy. There's like a lot of like romance. And I was reading and I was like, whoa, this is like, she wrote her own fan fiction. You got to give it to her. She wrote the novel, wrote the fan fiction, put it in one. And
I won't read this, but I will watch the movie adaptation.
It's going to be a really cool adaptation, I think. And the interesting thing about Fourth Wing and the series is that the writing style is tell, don't show, which some people really don't like, but some people really like. I have seen a lot of discourse about it and I've heard from a lot of people who are like, yeah, I'm into it. Let's just read it this way.
Get me to the smut. Get me to the dragons.
But the emotional resonance of their relationship works for me. Give me like an emotionally toxic relationship. I'm there for it on the page.
I mean,
the movie should be made by Larian Studios.
Telling can be great. Like Neil Gaiman tells all the time, and people are obsessed with him.
Yeah.
Like he'll just be like, and this is where he came from, and this is what the street looked like to him, and okay, and now we show. It's like, I think sometimes telling just saves time, just gets you to the stuff. Showing is hard, takes time.
Yep, this is exactly a perfect summary, Andale. She was a tiny, small, ridiculously tiny, but also strong, like super strong, but also hot and also dragons. That
But
is
she
correct.
does have Ehlers-Danlos syndrome, which was something that I enjoyed having some disability rep in there, which was a
Yeah,
cool little thing.
it was
Is this in
great.
a fantasy world or is
Yep.
it
It's
okay?
never named that. It's never the condition that she has is never named. It's just said that she has like really weak like joint or not like joints, but like ligaments and tendons.
Interconnective
Yeah.
tissue, yeah.
Yeah. And
But the author has EDS, so
yeah.
Gotcha.
But it's really fun. I like the way that they handle it. She does a few things uniquely and a few things that are super tropey, and
but she
it's
leans into
blast.
it. I will tell
Embraces
you,
it.
the book is this big. I read it in 3 weeks. I hadn't done that in years.
Yeah,
So,
it's a big old book, and then the new one just a new one came out relatively recently, and the pages were trimmed in black, and I was
yeah,
like,
I got that one.
"Wow, this is hot. This is really cool." But yeah, besides that, I'm reading on the other end of the complete spectrum, The Secret Garden,
Oh,
which
the OG?
yeah, I'm working on a project related to it, and so I was reading it, and I was like, "Wow, this is surprisingly like there's a few moments where you realize it was written in like the early 20th century, and then there's a few moments where you're like, wow, this person was like ahead of her time in terms of just like understanding emotional needs of children and things. Like, I don't know, it's a fun read. I think I heard about it, but I hadn't circled back to it in a while. So that's kind of what we're reading. I don't think there was any other questions that I saw. Um, Let me just make sure. Yeah, I think that we're good. Um,
Have a
Except
great
for
holiday weekend. Okay, so I'm confused. Do y'all not have is it a holiday today?
you mean for Good Friday?
Yeah.
I don't believe it's like a national holiday.
Oh.
Not in America.
No.
I've
No.
got Friday and Monday.
Nice.
Really?
Yeah.
Interesting. Yeah, we don't. But like people are kind of aware that this weekend is not supposed to be generally like stuff booked on it, I would say. But, you know, who knows? Um, oh, Preston says I didn't have work off, but I know people who did.
I'm
Well,
sorry.
I didn't know that people got Good Friday off. That's very surprising for me that Canada has it and the US doesn't. Because I feel like if someone was going to take a Christian holiday off, it would be
Yeah.
the
Well, it's not
US and
really
not
related to
Canada.
that. It's more like, hey, it's like springtime. Like I would say like we're pretty like I wouldn't say anything in terms of like how the government treats Easter is related to religion. I would say it's like we've been doing this for a while. It's spring, you know,
Interesting.
here's take the day off.
Yeah, it would be more like I would like expect Easter to maybe be off, but Good Friday feels so strongly like that is more of like more obscure than Easter, but more important to
I
Christians.
called it
So
Black Friday like 8 times this week, so
I mean, it works. Twas a sad Friday. But yeah, cool. Thank you so much everybody for joining us.
Thanks, everybody.
We will share what we're doing next week soon, but we have a lot of guests lined up soon. So that is going to be super fun. We will share that announcement. Thank you so much everybody. Have
have
a
a
good
great
one.
weekend.
Bye.